All right, everyone, now it's time for the ultimate fallout from the Democratic debates. The first round, I think it's 2 weeks till they have their next round. Here's my summation. First, I should talk about the second debate in specific. I did end up watching most of it, but like at some point it just became too much. It was too insane. It was more frenzied. Like the first debate, I guess, looking back at it, it's more genteel, more relaxed. This one, Sanders was attacking people, Harris especially. Gillibrand tried to get some jabs in. I would say the biggest loser of the night was Kirsten Gillibrand, because for people on the bottom tier, for people who are hovering on 1 or 2% in the polls, their goal at these debates is to get noticed and get noticed in a positive way. For some people on that stage, they fell flat. Yang fell flat completely. Gillibrand fell flat completely. They fell apart, actually. It was terrible. The standout performance for me, and with the first debate, remember, I analyzed it from others' reactions, not from my own viewership. With this one, I figured I would do kind of both. My takeaway is that the two people that walk away from this with a significant benefit are Kamala Harris and Pete Buttigieg, whose last name I know I'm mispronouncing, but I'm going to keep doing it on purpose. They were the ones that I think benefit from this debate. Biden sort of breaks even. And the other low tier candidates is like whatever. The big losers of the night, Gillibrand and Yang, and Bernie Sanders. Bernie Sanders looked uncomfortable. He looked challenged. He got to that point where he got antagonized. But the problem is, Bernie Sanders 4 years ago was simply more verbose. Bernie Sanders now up on stage looks like a befuddled old man. The optics simply aren't there. I do not expect Bernie Sanders to be nominated. If this is the way he's going to perform, have several more debates before a state even votes, he's not going to make it. He's not going to do well. Warren and Harris and Buttigieg and so forth will start to supplant him. He's not going to be able to contend with Biden. The problem for the Dem field overall is that Joe Biden has enough of a lead and probably enough of a hardened fan base so that if the race remains crowded, it really doesn't matter. Because I can't see any other individual being able to cobble together a coalition to challenge him other than Pete Buttigieg. All the people that would have been, like Gillibrand, I would have said early on, would be viable. If she were given attention, if she were given support, she could have been a viable contender against Biden, potentially win. She shot herself in the foot tonight, she's done. If you're hovering at 0% in the fucking polls and you make a fool of yourself because every time you speak you look combative and like unhinged, not gonna work. Meanwhile, Kamala Harris, here's the difference between perception and reality. The perception of most people, I think, within the Democratic Party. If you're a liberal, if you're the kind of person who could consider voting for Kamala Harris, you probably think she did a good job. She was very verbally assaulting towards Trump. Oh, he's a child abuser, I think she said, because of the border situation. It's like one of them said, what did they say? That he was a racist. Like, you know, that's Bernie Sanders' new line, is that Trump is racist, orange man bad. And it keeps getting elaborated on and more hyperbolic. And then Buttigieg, he looked more measured, a bit like he was like Kamala Harris, but calm, I would say. He comes away, I think, as the big winner. I'm sure some people probably think the same, but you've got to understand, I'm analyzing it from a non-biased perspective. I know I wouldn't vote for any of these people, but stepping back and looking just at the verbal performance, the elocution, sort of the gestural thing, which is Beto's big problem the other night, looking at stuff like that and looking at what would this platform that's being stated mean for the Democratic voters within their primaries, because it doesn't matter what, you know, a bunch of MAGA fans are going to think about the Democratic candidates. They're not voting for them. Looking at that, Buttigieg gets the #1 power ranking, just as the other night Warren and Cory Booker and Tulsi Gabbard really did well. Tonight it would be Buttigieg and Kamala Harris mainly. Yang, meanwhile, he couldn't even answer the question. It was very funny when challenged on China being a threat. You could see he looked visibly concerned, shaken, and then he immediately started talking about Russia. Yeah, there's a reason for that. I mean, let's not bother going into that, any conspiracy theories with the Yang bots, as they get all goofy. Gillibrand, the biggest loser, though, of the night, honestly. And then Sanders in third is the third biggest loser. Because he had the most to lose. He's the number 2 candidate, arguably, in the race. I can see Warren will notch up a few points. He'll probably go down a few points. He no longer looks as electable. That's the other problem. It boils down to electability. So the biggest loser of the Democratic debates, the first round, is the Democratic Party. Most of the candidates now don't really look electable. The other thing is this. Looking at the debates, looking at the way they speak, what they're saying, not a single person on either debate stage, other than maybe Bennett, arguably, which is hilarious, Swalwell, arguably, who is like, he broke even, I think, but he's riding on like 2%, so he's a no-show, basically, in the race. None of these people looked the part of a president. That matters. It matters whether the person acts the role. A lot of presidential politics is acting anyway. Diplomacy is half Shakespearean sort of symbolism and how you act and how you behave towards other people. Knowing how to schmooze and talk to people and say the right thing. Trump looks believable because he's already in the White House. Although in the last election, admittedly, there were some people, well, he's not presidential enough. Trust me, if you looked a little bit beneath the very superficial level, he looked a lot more presidential. There were a few people that could pass the sniff test. Marco Rubio was capable of acting presidential. Hillary Clinton, argued, as a former first lady, having been in the White House, yes, had that as well in her favor. Most of these people don't look the role. Biden does. But that's because he's been in the White House before. It's the same thing as with Hillary Clinton. I don't know that that's a huge advantage. Buttigieg, kind of. And then somebody like Gillibrand. But last night she didn't look the role. The biggest losers, the Democrats, because they haven't, so far after the first debates, they've exposed a glaring schismatic problem within their own party. It's going to be very funny. In the next debates, they're going to mix it up differently between the two. They're trying to get it so everyone is on stage with everyone else at some point, I guess. So I think next time Kamala Harris is going to have to deal with Beto O'Rourke, which is going to be funny. And seeing Elizabeth Warren and Kamala Harris on the same stage will be the big fireworks of the event, because they're both fighting for the same third wave voting bloc, the far left, specifically woman voting bloc. That's their relative strength. And so it's going to be interesting. Are they going to go for the person who lies about their race or the person who prosecuted a bunch of black people? Because really that's what it boils down to between the two of them. That's the other problem. You have so much hypocrisy up on stage. And there was one thing. This hurt Sanders more than anything else. And this was from Bennett, from one of the he's like a Hickenlooper, halfway sane. Bennett comes out and says, well, Bernie Sanders is talking about abolishing private health care entirely. Basically, that's what his plan means, and I oppose it completely. And let us remember that in every state they've tried it, they've rejected single payer, like Vermont. And he pointed out Vermont, and Sanders didn't actually address this because the claim was true. The claim is mostly true, and I'll explain that for people who don't know the backstory about this. It is true, and Sanders went around the question and started rambling about like human decency or it being it's a healthcare is a human right. It's not something to be purchased. It's like, one of those socialistic bullshit lines that they try to pay. It's pig in a poke situation. They're trying to get you to allow more government power, more strangulation, more taxation, so that the government can give you a shitty product because there's no competition in the system. That's what government-run health insurance really would mean in the United States with the system that we currently employ. They would slowly absorb more and more of it, and it'd fall apart. It'd be shitty. No, I would rather spend money to buy private health care. It means lower taxes for me. Good on me. I have that right. Yes, if it's a human, I have the right to purchase what I want. I also should have the right to not have health insurance. With the mandate, it's like a lot of people chose not to. They're like, well, I'm going to save money. So fuck this. Yeah, you get penalized for being too poor to afford a plan. That's really, really surreal. According to Obama, this was mercy and tenderness towards the poor. But the claim is true. What happened is that a Democratic study, it was commissioned in part by our liberal former Democratic governor, Peter Shumlin. Liberal governor, supermajority of Democrats in the House and the Senate, every progressive bloc in favor of it. They got none other than Jonathan Gruber in to advise on the situation. Year-long $1 million study, which, by the way, Gruber got sued for because he was submitting work slips. Apparently, when his staff were working, he was submitting it as though it was him, and of course, he's paid a lot more than his random little staffers. So he defrauded the state. He settled out of court for almost $500,000. Did you know that? Chief architect of Obamacare got successfully sued for our state for trying to defraud us because he was part of this program. It fell flat. It was rejected. Peter Shumlin said we can't do it. That's why he left politics, because all the progressives abandoned him. They wanted to hear that we could do single payer. He pointed out correctly the tax rate in the state of Vermont would be so high if you were to pay for this. The tax rate would have to be increased by double digits virtually across the board. It's not doable. People would leave the state. Businesses would definitely leave the state. Individuals would flee the state. The state would collapse. There is no way to pay for it. But when he pointed this out, he got, jumped down the throat of by all the progressives, because they have pie-in-the-sky beliefs. They've been indoctrinated by Bernie Sanders into thinking that it's actually doable without massive tax rates. Well, yeah, no thanks. I don't want to pay a 45-50% tax rate. I'm not exactly rich. I'm not Bill Gates. It's not ethical to ask me to pay more in taxes. I already pay fucking too much as it is. A lot of it goes to bombing people. Now it would go towards shitty healthcare. So I can get shitty healthcare and I pay twice as much as I would pay for a private plan that probably is better anyway. Yeah, no thanks. It's crazy. So the first Democratic debates were basically a disaster. A lot of these people looked unhinged. They said weird shit, sometimes breaking down into speaking Spanish to try to impress the bilingual crowd, I guess, or something. And it just looks like pandering. That's the other part. For the most part, all of their grandiose, sweeping statements, my children, my civil rights, my human rights, my think of the orphans at the border stuff, it broke down and it looked inauthentic. It just looks politician-like. It just doesn't look right. It's not like when Trump goes off kilter and delivers a red-faced rant without a teleprompter and sort of says what he really means. There's a stark difference between that and between the Democratic field. And seeing them get all hyperbolic about how evil Trump is funny. They're trying to out-Orange Man bad one another. And so he goes from a racist to a child abuser in the same paragraph with two different people on stage. Like, give it a rest, dude. Give the virtue signaling a little bit of a rest. Why don't you discuss what you actually want to do? And then, more importantly, tell us how you're going to do it. Oh, we're going to have universal health care. Oh, we're going to open the border and decriminalize border crossings. Oh, we're going to do this, that, and the other thing. How? I'm not hearing plans from any of you. Bernie Sanders has the closest thing to a true manifesto that you have, and his boils down to me paying a 55% tax rate or some crazy shit. Yeah, again, no thank you. That's about all. Peace out.